Well, welcome everybody. Pleased to be here. Really starting a series of conversations with people I admire as leaders. And it's going to be conversations on leadership. And my first guest and friend is Diane Schwarz. A little bit about Diane. She is a multi-time enterprise chief information officer, widely respected amongst her peer group, someone that I know I can call anytime. She's always going to be generous with her time, with me and with others. And on top of that, one of the things we're going to talk about today is how generous she's been in spirit and in really serving and mentoring others. And a little bit about Diane, in addition to that, is that not only is she an inspirational leader, but she's got a great sense of humor. A lot of fun to be around, does not take herself seriously. And so the last thing I would say is she is someone who's spawned a lot of great leaders who've gone on to be successful in their own right. And for those football fans out there, I'll refer to her as the Nick Saban of CIOs. So without further ado, Diane, great to have you here. I'd be interested in your initial remarks on this, and I want to dig a little bit into your background, but tell me a little bit about your philosophy on leadership.
So I think it's fundamental to be an authentic leader. If you can't be authentically you, that shows up in the workplace and it makes people really uncomfortable. And you need to be very curious, always be agile in your learning journey. And I think this is most important, humility. Do not strive to be the smartest person in the room because there is so much knowledge and power in the room. Everybody else is an expert in their own way. Take advantage of it. You're only going to yield better results. So don't be the smartest person in the room.
I love it. Well, we all got to where we are in different ways. And I'm a big fan of Adam Grant. I'm not sure if he read his books or not, but he has a book called Hidden Potential, and he refers to this notion of scaffolding, of how leaders and mentors can be scaffolding for the younger generation of talent. So before we get to what you're doing today in that capacity, tell us a little bit more about your story. Like, how did you evolve to who you are today as a leader? Who are some of your early influences as you developed your own skill set and really learned your own leadership skills?
So interesting that you would use the word scaffolding, because when I think about the trajectory or the shape of a career, my career, anybody's career, I think of one of those geodesic jungle climbing domes on a playground.
Okay.
Up, down, sideways, over, through. It is not a ladder up the slide. It is all over. So I started with an engineering and an English degree. English because engineering didn't feed my soul, and feeding my soul is important.
Okay.
Got a job leading a startup company right out of college. Apparently had a lot of gravitas at the time to do that. Got my MBA at night while I was doing that. Met my husband, who was living cross country. So when I finished the MBA, went into consulting, had kids, couldn't really do consulting back then because we didn't have remote technology because I'm older than snot. So then took a job. It was the most god-awful job. It was manager of budget systems.
Well, it sounds terrible, but what was it so bad about it? Beyond
we did budgeting 365 days of the year. Once we got done with this budget, we had to do the next forecast and then the next budget. Who loves budgeting and reforecasting?
Some people do, but probably not very many.
I don't know. I think I was the most hated person in the building. So anyway, I had a number of jobs that were not IT jobs. The first 10 years of my career, I was what you now might call shadow IT. So I was doing program management or running systems or building applications that IT didn't like. And after about 10 years, one of my bosses said, at your next career move, just go do IT. Because I was IT's biggest pain in the,
Did you have any sort of technology background, or did you fall into it?
Well, I had the mechanical engineering degree.
Okay.
So we did have to write programs and things like that. But no, the computer degrees, computer science degrees, yes, they certainly existed in 1948 when I graduated. Joking.
I appreciate
But it wasn't nearly as prevalent as it was today.
Did you even know what a CIO was at the time?
No, I never even heard of it.
You didn't, yeah, it wasn't, and I'm sure it was not nearly as prominent as it is today, but you didn't even see that at the time as a career journey?
Had no idea it was an option. So, and, you know, I was raised in a relatively small conservative town. You know, mom raised the family, kept the house. Dad was a dentist. So I didn't have an environment where I could even learn about technology or CIOs or business.
Where did you grow up, Diane? Remind me.
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay.
I'm a Grand Rapidian and a Michigander. So about 10 years into my career, we moved for my husband's job. And I worked for a mid-sized $200 million company as basically their head of IT, and then negotiated my way into a global chief information officer title.
At that same company?
At that company.
You said, hey, I'm doing this. You might as well give me the title.
Well, actually, I pre-negotiated it.
Did you?
So they made me an offer for, I don't know, director of IT or head of IT, something like that. And I know I said, if 6 months from now, if I am all that and living up to all of the expectations you have of me, then I get the title of vice president and global chief information officer. And they said, yes.
Nice.
That's where titles are free. I didn't get extra compensation for it, but I did get the credibility of the title.
Well, it sounds like there was someone who saw something in you, said, next role you take an IT role. Would you consider whoever that person was a bit of a mentor or someone?
Well, yeah, he certainly had insights into what I was good at.
Okay.
So, yeah.
If you think about who was your Diane Schwarz back in the day, who's the one that said, you've got a lot of talent, I'm going to invest in you and like open doors and believe in you, gave you opportunities?
You know, I wish I could say that early in my career, I had a number of advocates. I'm not so sure that I did. I learned a lot from some really bad bosses.
There is value in that.
We could do a whole podcast on bad bosses someday.
Yeah. Well, there's a movie on it.
Yeah.
Isn't there? It's that prevalent, of a concept.
But I don't have the Jennifer Aniston hair for that movie. But I will say that there were particularly some women early on in my career that showed you can be your authentic self and you can have a family. So there was a partner when I was working for Ernst & Young at the time, and she had a young family, and she told me that she brought her child, her young baby, to the partners conference because she was still breastfeeding. Okay, this was early 90s, I suppose. This was mid 80s maybe.
Oh.
I was shocked. I didn't think you could do that. And
so
she showed me that you could.
On her part was pretty bold.
It was really bold.
So it sounds like she was, even if she didn't say anything to you, she was a role model who said, wait, I can do that too.
Absolutely.
She set the tone.
Absolutely. At that same firm, there was another leader she was a phenomenal leader at the company, but she had a gig on the weekends where she performed in jazz clubs. She loved to sing. She knew that wasn't going to be her career and that wasn't going to pay the bills, but she was very unabashed about the fact that was what she loved to do and that was where she was going to spend her weekends. Again, you have to fuel your soul and invest in that.
So it sounds like if I had to paraphrase, there were people who were mentors to you, but probably didn't realize it. They didn't proactively say, hey, Diane, I'm going to take you under my wing, but they set an example. Was that a motivation for you personally to say, hey, I'm going to set the example. I'm not only going to set the example, but I'm going to be more proactive when I'm in that position to help others who need that advice and encouragement that I needed at the time.
Well, let me tell you a story about one of the pivotal moments when I realized when you need to tell somebody about their potential. Okay. So I was a business unit CIO, and the business unit CEO that I was working for, she and I were having a conversation, and she said, well, you know why they made this move for you, don't you? And I said, no, nobody clued me in. And she said, you're being groomed for the enterprise CIO role. I had no idea. And I remember I went home that weekend and I just was stunned. I had been working towards that for my career, but I didn't realize until she said it that somebody else recognized in me what I thought I recognized in me. And so it took me a while to get my head around that. And then I could work more planfully, more intentionally towards that. And so now when I see somebody who has the potential, I tell them, you can be CEO, you can be CIO, you can be, whatever you want to be. And I think that validation is so important for people to just hear that out loud from somebody who maybe has a position of authority or respect.
So it sounds like one thing is like to believe in people and then articulate to them you believe in them. After you do that, then you still have to do things to give them opportunities, set them up for success. So it sounds like it was great that you knew someone believed in you. What were the other things they did besides putting you in that sort of role to give you opportunities to build the skill set you needed to really take that stepping stone into the top role?
I remember my first enterprise CIO role board meeting. I had inherited a cyber event. It had been revealed right around the transition, no fault of anyone.
Welcome to the role, Diane.
That's right. Yeah. Welcome to the role. And of course, you go into the boardroom, and at that point, I'm literally the lowest person in the echelon going into the board meeting. And there's, retired general and retired CEOs and CFOs and just all of this brain power in there. It's very, very intimidating. And my boss told me, he said, remember, on this topic, you are the most knowledgeable person in the room. I know I said, don't try to be the smartest person in the room, but in that case, I needed to be. I was the authority, and I did know more about that subject than any of them. And so that too was very validating for me to realize, yeah, I got this.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, fast forward to now. One of the things we were talking about earlier is how proud you are of being, as I referred to, that Nick Saban of CIOs. Tell me more about that, your track record of developing people who've gone on to be enterprise CIOs themselves. And then what are the things you did that really enabled that?
So I tried counting the other day, and I think I ran out of fingers.
That's great. That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. One is to really understand, what are people's strengths? Yes, it's important to understand their development needs, but to go with the coaching strategy. If you have somebody who is the best kicker at field goals, you want to double down and help train them so they can consistently make that goal. You're not going to invest in them to be the quarterback. Why would you do that? So to be able to really identify, is somebody good at operations? Are they good at strategy? Are they good at business conversations? It's really understanding that, helping them see that, and then helping them double down and really improve upon that. So helping somebody with their self-awareness is important. And, it's just important to have the hard conversations with people who think they have the potential or the desire, and they might not. There've been a number of conversations where somebody said, I want to be a CIO. They're in the last 5 years of their career. I say, is that realistic? Why is that what you want? Do you want financial prosperity and stability for your family? Or do you want to retire with the title? What really is your goal? And I've actually helped steer people into some other paths that were much more fulfilling for them by having the really candid conversation on where they should best apply themselves.
That's a good point. And I actually was talking to someone about this the other day, that one of the non-negotiables for leaderships I think about is feedback, both positive and negative, because it really is a gift in real time as you can. One of the challenging things about being a leader is having those uncomfortable conversations. But you have to have them.
Feedback is a gift. I heard that from one of my mentors multiple times, and I have shared that with folks a number of times.
I really like the fact that you'd mentioned focus on your strength, because I think some people might say, hey, this is your strength. Let's build some other skills. I don't want to diminish that, but I think what I heard you say is don't reinvent someone, but I'm hypothesizing that you'd also say, double down on your strength, but find ways to surround yourself with others who complement you. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. I admit there are areas where I am terrible at.
No one can spike 10 out of 10 on everything. It just doesn't work.
No. So I'm terrible in the kitchen. I don't cook. I'm not very good at processes and procedures and metrics. I need somebody to round me out in that. So you're absolutely right. So it helps people to have that self-awareness on where they need the help. I think it's a sign of strength to ask for help because you're building the team. You don't want a team of all quarterbacks. You need a team of defensemen and linemen and
I'm really
right ends. And I have no idea what I'm talking about
today. Yeah. Well, like we talked about before, you're jumping right in there. So speaking of Nick Saban, to give an example for those who are not football fans, 7, 8 national championships with 2 different teams. But what's more impressive is in the recent college football playoff, all 4 coaches in the Final Four had coached under him at one point in time. So that's why the Nick Saban of CIOs is such a compliment.
I'm honored. Thank you.
So I think it's really interesting that the first time you stepped into an enterprise CIO role, you also inherited a pretty stressful situation. And I know throughout your career, different times, you've had all kinds of stressful situations as a CIO. My experience is you're like the duck above the water. You don't see it, but I know your feet are working really strenuously under the water. And my question is, what have you done in yourself to develop resiliency, whether on your own and or through the help of your own mentors? And how does that manifest itself in how you try to develop resiliency in your own team members and future leaders?
So I think it's so important to preserve your core. In the middle of a operational outage, a cyber incident, all of the heat is on you and your team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to protect my team. Put all the scrutiny you want on me, but let my team do their job. First, how do I protect my core? I do use the metaphor of, if you know Paddington Bear and his big rain slicker.
I'm familiar.
Okay.
Yep.
Put it on in the morning. Let them sling mud at you or anything else all day long.
I'll use my imagination.
Yep. Take it off at the end of the day, hose it off, and go back to who you are.
It's a good analogy.
So another way to think about it is, we are playing a role at work. Yes, I'm my authentic self at work, but it still is the work Diane, not the personal Diane. They can sling mud all they want at the personal Diane. I'm still me, and go home where I'm a wife and a mother and a sister and an aunt and just me. And so I have to be able to just protect my core. Now, in terms of protecting my team, it's also important that I teach them balance in the heat of the moment. Yes, we're working 28 hours a day in the middle of a cyber incident. You still need to go to the dentist and go to the doctor and pick up your sick kid from school. Well, during one of the cyber events, I had already had the box reserved for the Peter Gabriel concert that I was going to bring my team to, employee motivation thing, right? You had to reserve that months in advance, and you had to compete with everybody for that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the middle of the cyber event. You know what we're going to do? We're going to go to that concert. And somebody reached out to me on social media a couple of weeks ago, and she said, I still remember you took us to that concert in the middle of the cyber event. And that's what you want. You want people to remember you for bringing balance. Yeah. Is somebody going to reach out to you and say, I remember when you made me work 28 hours a day and we didn't get days off for 63 days in a row? No, you want to be remembered for helping your teams celebrate and bring balance.
I love it. That's great.
In your eyes, Peter Gabriel.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you know this as having been a CIO multiple times, and I know it by osmosis, recruiting your peer group, that the key to success, or many of the keys to success are not so much the technology, but it's what we refer to as the soft skills: executive presence, stakeholder engagement, relationship management, business acumen, the ability to influence. And frankly, whether you want to be or not, you are in some sort of sales at the end of the day. So what are the things you've done to develop that skill set, not only in yourself, but in your team members?
So I've often said that my role is that of being a translator and a facilitator. So I need to learn the language of the business.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm in the paper and packaging business. We're the greatest sustainable paper and packaging business in the world. I didn't know anything about paper mills and corrugated boxes 15 months ago.
I bet you didn't. You had reason to know it at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I've had to learn that to be able to talk with our CEOs, our CFOs, our business colleagues, to have any bit of credibility. So learning the language of others and not expecting them to learn the language of IT is one.
Yeah.
The other is helping people be comfortable around you. So I have two things that I can talk about. So one, understanding somebody's style preference. And there's a really short quiz out there where you can understand somebody's style as personified by birds. Okay.
Okay.
The eagle.
That's fascinating.
Bird of prey.
Yeah.
Okay. Most CEOs are birds of prey. And you can see this because they have trophies and diplomas and cars and airplanes like displayed in their office. Symbols of power. Okay. The owl is the analytical person. So the CFOs and engineers, heads of engineering, typically very analytical. Back in the day, they used to have stacks and stacks and stacks of paper on their desk.
That sounds about right.
Now it's a clean desk. You can also look, if you look on their desktop, if they have like 300 icons on their desktop or a 0, it's usually one of those two. So with them, you have to go with all kinds of facts and give them lots of time to observe and assess and analyze. As opposed to the birds of prey, you go in, we need this decision, here's the recommendation, boom, get out. Now, the dove is the peacemaker. They want to understand your intent. Are you here to take my people? Are you here to take my budget? What is your hidden agenda? Now, the dove, the peacemaker, their office will look like a living room. Pictures of family, flowers, very inviting. So if you are talking with the dove, the first 25 minutes of that 30-minute meeting are going to be connecting on a personal basis. They don't want to talk business because they suspect your hidden agenda.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a colleague of mine who calls that, he loves golf. He calls it the 19th hole conversation.
Okay.
Meaning you have the conversation and then you talk business a little bit at the very end.
Yes.
Because you're building that rapport and trust.
But if you were with an eagle, you're going to have that conversation at the first hole, and then the rest of the 19, you're going to enjoy it all. So, yeah. And then the fourth one is the peacock, who's very much a collaborator, ideator. You can guess I kind of fit in the peacock category. So the reason I say that, very long answer, is because you have to understand somebody else's style preference so that you can flex to theirs. Don't expect them to flex to you. In order to influence others, you need to understand how they operate and make them comfortable. I said I was going to give you 2 answers. That was the really long one. Here's the short one.
Okay.
Be prepared to talk about conversational items other than the weather.
Like
I have to know, like Nick Saban, okay? So the morning after the Super Bowl, I think I was in the Netherlands. My husband let me know. He said, "Do you know who won the Super Bowl?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you know who was in the Super Bowl?" And I said, "The Seahawks."
Well, you got the winning team. You got lucky there.
That's right. So I have to know just enough of other subjects. The other thing is, okay, I like fast cars. So I can talk about cars with people. So know just enough to be able to talk with somebody on things they might be interested in.
Yeah. Did you learn that through experience, and or did did others exhibit that or mentor you to give you that advice along the way?
Well, I think that when you are the minority in the room and you see 9 guys that are all talking football and you're the only female, you can either lean in and be part of the conversation, or you can be a wallflower and be bored.
Yeah.
I don't like being bored and being a wallflower, so I lean in.
That's adapting to the environment. Great answers.
Thank you.
Well,
Sorry, the one was
I think
so
I'd
long.
like to close with maybe a little bit. We don't have to include this. Is as you think about your own trajectory, whether when you're going to be done being a CIO someday, how are you going to continue to contribute and give back? What's going to be meaningful for you as you think about what's beyond being a CIO?
So if you remember when either you were figuring out your major in college, or you were figuring out what you were going to do after college or after your military career, you had so many options. It was almost overwhelming, and you changed your mind 5 times a day. At least I did.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
You don't like. There's actually a lot of value in deciding things you're not going to do.
That's
true. At least carve things out so you have fewer options to consider that make sense instead of trying to be all things to all people.
So I have been going through the journey of what will I do when I'm not working full time, and I don't have the answer yet. So might I sit on a couple of boards? Perhaps, but interestingly enough, so I recently enrolled in a master's program. It's a master's in thanatology, so it's a master's in grief and loss. Go look it up.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, there aren't very many programs in it, but I've really enjoyed the learning. It's a discipline that has nothing to do with work, kind of, in oblique ways. It can, right? But it's fueling a different part of my soul that I didn't realize needed fueling. So I don't think I'm going to go back and get a bunch of PhDs, but I might enroll in some other classes. And I don't know, maybe I'll just be a giant nomad and go off into the sunset and you'll never hear from me again. I cannot predict which it's going to be.
Well, I'm not an authority on this, but I have a feeling you're in pretty good company. I suspect there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out what in the world that looks like.
I'm sure I'll still be coaching right up until the end, though.
I believe it. Great. Well, Diane, thanks for your time. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for all the referrals you make. I could, just to reinforce what we talked about, you consistently are very generous with your time and your introductions, and I've always appreciated that. And I know my peer group does out there. And thanks for the generosity of your time again today, too.
I always pick up the phone for you.
I appreciate it, Diane.
All right.